Liao Zhai stories. Rakshahai City.
Maji is a handsome young man, and very talented. At the age of 14, his poems and articles were very famous in the county. He is free and unrestrained, loves to socialize with entertainers, and sometimes plays a female role. Because of his handsome appearance, everyone gave him the nickname, Perfect Man. One day, his father said to him, "Books can neither satisfy hunger nor keep out the cold. You can replace me. I am old and can no longer go oversea to do business." Therefore, Maji learned to do business and often went oversea with his father's friends. Once, a hurricane was encountered at sea, and the ship was thrown into the sky by the violent waves. The ship sank. Maji floated on the sea for 3 days and nights with a plank in his arms, and was pushed ashore by the waves. This is a seaside town, and the people here look like ugly ghosts. But when they saw Maji, they ran wildly and shouted that the monster was coming. The frightened Maji found that people were afraid of him, and all the people who ate at the stall ran away, so he simply sat down and had a full meal. For several days, no one dared to talk to him. He walked outside the city, but there were some decent-looking people in the mountain village, but they were dressed in rags like beggars. They watched Maji from a distance, and they dared to speak when they saw that he was not a man-eating monster. They told Maji, "This is the great Rakshasa kingdom, where appearance is more important than knowledge. The most beautiful person can be a prime minister, next can be a local official, and the next is a member of the shogunate. With faces like villagers, they can only suffer and suffer." Maji told his story. He wanted to go to the capital to see if he could manage to return home. The next morning, the mountain people happily accompanied Maji to the capital. Just as the morning court was over, all the officials went back to their offices. Under the guidance of the mountain people, Maji saw the most beautiful man, the prime minister. His nose had 3 nostrils. His ears were turned backwards. His eyelashes hung like curtains over his eyes. More than a dozen high-rank officials also looked hideous and weird. Sure enough, as the official position gets lower, the ugliness also gets weaker. Maji was laughing to himself. When the people on the street saw him, they screamed and ran like ghosts. There are legends in the capital about this Chinese Maji. The dignitaries wanted to learn more and asked the mountain people to bring Maji, but they didn't dare to accept it, so they just peeked through the crack of the door. Maji was very angry. One day, a mountain resident told him that a retired servant had been sent to foreign countries many times by the order of the king. Maji decided to ask for a meeting. Sure enough, the servant treated Maji as a guest of honor. He said that he is already 120 years old, and the biggest regret in his life is that he has never been to China, and it is a great joy to have a distinguished Chinese guest. He hosted a grand banquet for Maji, and ordered the singers to take turns singing and dancing before the banquet to add to the fun. The singers are all like nightshades, with white brocade wrapping their heads and red robes sweeping the floor. The tunes and rhythms of singing and dancing are very strange. The host was very intoxicated, and asked Maji if there were such songs and dances in China. Maji sang a song impromptu, and the master was very impressed, saying that although he was old and retired, he must recommend such a talent as Maji to the king. The next morning, the servant asked to see the king. After hearing his announcement, the king agreed to summon Maji, but the prime minister and other high-rank officials tried their best to dissuade him for fear of frightening him, so the king had to give up. The servant felt sorry for Maji, so he kept him at home and often discussed knowledge with him. One day, Maji got drunk, painted his face with ink to pretend to be the ugly Zhang Fei, drew his sword, danced, and sang generously. The master praised him very much, saying that he is extremely handsome, and if he is asked to dress up as Zhang Fei to meet the prime minister, he will definitely get a high official and generous salary. Maji refused. How can he change his original appearance in order to seek prosperity and wealth? Unable to withstand repeated persuasion from his master, Maji had no choice but to agree. So, the servant held a banquet to entertain the prime minister and all the high-rank officials. During the dinner, he introduced Maji, who had painted his face black, to the distinguished guests. The distinguished guests were surprised to see Maji's transformation from ugly to handsome, and they were all very happy to invite him to have a drink with him. The master invited Maji to sing and dance while everyone was drinking. He danced a piece of Yiyang tune, and the honored guests fell in admiration. Therefore, the prime ministers and others recommended Maji to the king one after another, praising him for his beauty and talent. The king was very happy, and immediately called Maji into the palace and asked him about the way of governing the country in China. Maji spoke in an orderly manner, which the king appreciated very much. The king gave a banquet in the royal garden. After drinking for 3 rounds, he invited Maji to sing and dance. According to local customs, Maji also wrapped his head in white brocade, singing and dancing, spinning and jumping. The king admired him very much and made him a high-rank official. The king has always been kind to Maji. However, as time went by, the officials gradually discovered that Maji had a fake face, and often whispered behind him, and they all alienated him. Feeling isolated and uneasy, Maji asked to resign, but the king refused. Only gave him a 3 months' leave. Maji returned to the mountain village with the gold, silver and jewels bestowed by the king, and the mountain people greeted him with cheers. Maji distributed the gold and silver to the poor mountain people who had helped him, and they were very grateful. They are going to sea market to search for rare treasures to repay Maji. They told him, "There is a market in the sea, where shark people from all over the world come to exchange trade with other people from all directions and countries, and sometimes gods also come to visit the market." Maji wanted to go sightseeing with them, but they refused, saying that going back and forth would take risks, and the dignitaries dared not go in person, only entrusting them to buy gold and silver. Maji said, "Am I a person who is afraid of risks?" Red birds appeared on the sea surface, and the mountain people told Maji that the red birds was passing the news, and the market day would be 7 days later. They were busy loading food, fresh water, etc., onto a big boat with a flat bottom and high rails. Set sail, 10 people rowed oars, and sailed against the waves. 3 days later, Maji saw pavilions and pavilions appearing in the clouds and waves from a distance, and countless ships had gathered outside the towering city walls of the enemy towers. Not long after, the boat arrived at the city. Maji followed the mountain people into the city, and saw the crowds in the market, and the rare treasures displayed and sold were dazzling, most of which could not be seen in the real world. Maji was amazed and admiring, when he suddenly saw people running away, saying that the 3rd prince of Dongyang had come. Maji looked up, and saw a young man riding a fine horse approaching slowly. The 3rd prince stared at Maji for a moment, then walked past him. Then, he sent an entourage to ask about his native place and family background, and Maji answered them one by one. The 3rd prince was very happy, saying that it was a great fate to meet guests from tens of thousands of miles away. He ordered his entourage to bring a precious horse, and invited Maji to swim with him in bridle. The 2 of them rowed out of the west city gate, and as soon as they reached the shore of the island, the precious horse Maji was sitting on suddenly hissed and jumped into the sea, which made him cry out in fright. However, the sea water parted under his feet, like 2 high walls standing tall. The group continued to ride their horses, and soon they saw a crystal palace with beams made of tortoiseshell and tiles made of fish scales. The 3rd prince invited Maji into the palace and met with the Dragon King. When the Dragon King heard that Maji was a sage in China, he stepped down from the throne to welcome him with a smile on his face. The Dragon King said, "Mr. Maji is a scholar, and his literary talent must be superb. Please write me a mirage poem about the sea, how about it?" Maji hurriedly replied, "Of course." The Dragon King ordered people to set up crystal inkstones, dragon hair brushes, snowy paper, and orchid incense ink. Maji thought about it for a while, and at one stroke, he presented a 1,000-word mirage poem about the sea to the Dragon King. After the Dragon King read it, he slapped the desk and said in admiration, "Mr. Genius, this poem has greatly added glory to our water country. He called together family members and friends, hosted a banquet at Taixia Palace, and welcomed Maji. During the reception, the Dragon King said that he would marry his beloved young daughter to Maji, and asked him if he would agree. Maji felt deeply he was not good enough, but he would not respectful otherwise. As a result, he nodded vaguely. The Dragon King ordered, "Please come in, princess." Immediately, the drums sounded, and the princess came out surrounded by a group of palace ladies. The princess bowed lightly to Maji, and he felt his eyes light up, but the princess had already retreated gracefully. After the banquet was over, a pair of maids led Maji into the princess's side palace with a pair of colored candles. The palace is splendid and fragrant, the coral bed is dotted with huge pearls, and the princess is waiting for him affectionately and silently. The next day, Maji went to the hall to thank the king. The Dragon King made him the prince consort and ordered his mirage poem to be copied and spread all over the world. So all the Sea Dragon Kings sent special envoys to congratulate and invite their concubines to the banquet. Wearing an embroidered robe and straddling a green dragon, Maji went out to the banquet surrounded by dozens of warriors with bows and halberds. For 3 days in a row, he traveled all over the world, and the name of Perfect Man spread accordingly. The princess is quiet and gentle, and loves writing and painting. She often sings with Maji's poems. They love each other and get along happily. There is a jade tree in the palace, with transparent branches and jasper-like leaves, which are extremely dense. They often play the piano and the flute in the shade of the eucalyptus tree. The jade tree is in bloom, like a gardenia carved from red agate. Every petal makes a clang when it falls to the ground. There are often exotic birds with golden and green feathers flying around and whining around the tree, which arouses Maji's deep yearning for his homeland. He told the princess that he had been away from home for 3 years, and whenever he thought of his gray-haired parents, he would feel restless. He hoped that the princess would go back with him. The princess said, "How can we follow each other across the different world?" She also said that she didn't want to use the love of husband and wife to destroy the family happiness, and she must try to make the reunion happen. Maji couldn't help crying. The princess sighed and said, "Can't have the best of both worlds, what can I do?" The next day, when Maji came back from outside, the Dragon King asked, "I heard that the son-in-law is homesick, how about leaving tomorrow?" Maji was very grateful and said that he would definitely come back for a reunion in the future. That night, the princess hosted a banquet to say goodbye. Maji asked, "When will we meet again?" The princess said that the love was over. Maji couldn't help crying. But the princess said, "A wife who is loyal to her husband and who are of the same heart, this is a good marriage, why stay together day and night?" The princess told him that she was pregnant, asked him to name the child, and asked him to leave a token. Maji said, "If the girl is named Dragon Palace, if the boy is named Rich Ocean, take out a pair of red jade lotus flowers from the Raksha kingdom and leave them to the princess." The princess presented him with a bag of inexhaustible jewels. She also told him to go boating on the South Island on April 8, 3 years later. At dusk, the Dragon King hosted a banquet to see him off, and presented many treasures to Maji. Maji bid farewell to the Dragon King and went out of the palace. The princess took him to the seaside in a white ram chariot. Maji watched her fading away in bewilderment. The seawater recombined and the waves rolled. People in the real world thought that Maji had died long ago, but now that he suddenly returned to his hometown, his elderly parents were overjoyed, and relatives and friends rushed to tell each other and came to congratulate him. His parents planned to propose marriage to Maji, but he resolutely refused. He always missed the princess's affection and looked forward to the promised day and night. Finally, this day is coming. Maji rowed a boat around the South Island to search. Instead of seeing the princess, he saw 2 children sitting on the water, neither moving nor sinking, playing in the water. As soon as he got close, the boy grabbed his hand and threw himself into his arms. The girl was crying, and Maji quickly took her into his arms too. The 2 children are very handsome. On the small flower hats they wear, each has a red jade lotus flower. There is a brocade pouch tied on the small flower cap, which is a letter from the princess. telling him the endless miss for her and the unswerving love until death. She hopes he will take care of the son and daughter. Maji read the letter repeatedly, and his clothes were soaked with tears. The son and daughter tightly hugged his neck, calling out loudly, "Go home, go home." Maji was so sad that he could only see the vast sea and misty waves in front of him. "Princess, where are you?"